And welcome back to another episode of the Awfully Irish podcast. Today, we're joined by Samuel Goodman. Samuel, how about you introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me on. So, I am the author of an upcoming book called Beyond Carbon Neutral: How We Fix the Climate Crisis Now. Essentially, it lays out step by step how we can take action right now with the tools we have available to keep climate change from getting worse and ultimately reverse the damage.
There you go. And it's coming out in about a week's time, right?
Yes, the week of April 26th.
Now, lucky for myself and Thomas, we got early access to see some of your fine work. And oh my God, was it fine. So
Well,
normally we talk a little bit on the more like agricultural side, or, what the average person can do day to day, but you focus more so on the energy side of climate change. So you have a few, actually, I was going to say, I said beforehand, before we started, you'd love how we do it over here in Ireland. We burn like carbon rich dirt called turf.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that only became illegal last year, 2 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So, we're pumping some dodgy stuff into the atmosphere. What do you think's the cleanest way to go at it at the moment?
Well, it really depends on the resources you have locally available. So the ultimate goal is to get to some state where your power grid runs on things that aren't emitting carbon, i.e. they're carbon neutral. So the US is relatively blessed in abundance because we can use basically all types of renewable energy. We have the massive deserts in the Southwest that are ideal for different kinds of solar power. We have the Great Plains and our long coastlines where you can build plenty of wind turbines. We have some geothermal reserves, not as plentiful as Iceland relatively, but we can get a good chunk of our energy from there. Potentially, we have plenty of rivers that we can dam up. And then we have the industry and the capacity to really build the energy storage that will even out the daily, hour by hour, and also the seasonal fluctuations in some of those renewable energy sources. So when you're trying to design an energy system, you're looking at what kind of resources you have available. So now, I haven't been to Ireland, but I can hazard a guess that there's much less desert over there than there is over here in the United States.
Yes, good guess.
So solar might not be the best option. However, you are an island, you have plenty of coastlines. That's ideal for building really high capacity wind turbines to get a lot of consistent energy from out at sea. So it's all about finding the balance and trying to diversify that as much as possible.
I think our main source of renewable energy, and I say it would be wind turbines.
I thought it was hydro. There's up to 12% of our energy came from hydro.
But I live right beside a wind farm, like wind turbine farm right near me. And I remember when they came in, there was a load of people. Remember they were protesting them, Jared?
Well, they were protesting them because they were being built beside their houses, which devalued the house. Well, yeah, that's one of the reasons. Like, it would devalue your house. Like, I know people are still selling their houses because there was some like put in beside their house. Yeah,
Mad.
Yeah, it's a bit weird when they're put beside your house, unless you want one there, like you buy your own one, whatever. But when we talk about them at sea, that's just such a good idea. And I don't understand why it's not being done to like a gigantic scale. Like it could be. Like, Irish waters aren't exactly known to be abundant. So why don't we just sort out the energy by slamming them in there?
Well, in the United States, one of the main issues, we don't have really that much offshore wind capacity. We have literally about 5 wind turbines off the coast of New England. And there was a big push, about a decade ago to try to build a new wind farm out there, but it was blocked because, a lot of people on the shore didn't want to have their views ruined by having these wind turbines out in the distance.
Dude, if you see those things, it looks like you're living in the future. In fairness,
I know, right?
They look awesome.
I don't get it, but they were perturbed enough to mount a substantial legal defense, and they had the resource to just keep that going until ultimately the developer gave up, and now we don't have that many wind turbines available to us offshore.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how, we kind of put our faces in between progress. I don't know how I was going to phrase that, but it's kind of like how we put ourselves in the way of progress is what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a good idea to have them out there, but Oh, it kind of ruins my view of the ocean. Like, how often do you look at the ocean? You see much out there? The occasional dinghy. Oh, you didn't want the dinghy there. Like, it's a straw man argument. Like, there's no real argument there. Now, it's kind of different when it's in front of your house. Like, I know places that they were like 200 meters beside your house. And I wouldn't like that, to be honest. I would really hate that.
Well, there are certain, effects that it can have if you're too close, just because it is a big piece of machinery that's moving. So it does generate sound and vibrations, which if it is too close, you can find that disturbing, which is why, out in the Great Plains in the United States, you see them way out in farm fields where nobody lives, but they can still generate all that electricity without negatively impacting the land.
Yeah. Which is, the best way to go about it. Just go where like there's no one.
Yeah.
And you'll have no problems. There'll be nothing. But then, like one of my favorite ideas when it comes to renewable energy is hydroelectric. That's just literally like just build a dam. Let the water go through, and it spins the turbine, but get some energy out of it. It's just so passive and so like I guess easy. I don't see why not put to a bigger scale.
There are some limitations to hydropower, unfortunately. It has to be in the proper site for it to really make sense. You need to be able to have that reservoir behind it. You need to have a big enough height difference that you can work with. And it's also not as necessarily reliable as you might think it is, because a lot of that hydropower that you're getting this year depends on the snow that fell last year. So as it melts, it swells the rivers and goes through your dam. So you do get a lot of these seasonal fluctuations and year-to-year fluctuations. So just because you have a dam in place doesn't necessarily mean it's going to provide the same amount of power all the time. So that's something you also have to balance out. And there are other considerations too when you're building a dam, because it's also useful for flood control, for agriculture. So you have these other competing uses for it that make it somewhat difficult to just throw it out there and completely solve your problem. And it's an important and integral part of your energy system, but it goes back to being a part of a more diverse system to kind of balance out all those competing things.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not as simple as I'd like to believe it to be. But when you look at renewable energy as a whole, do you ever include nuclear?
Nuclear is the interesting question.
Kind of a gray area, right?
It's always the elephant in the room, because you have, some people are like, we need to do nuclear. Nuclear will get us through this. We just need to build more reactors. And then on the opposite side, you have people who say, we just need to shut down all our nuclear completely right now. We can't have this. We can't.
Have you seen
more.
Chernobyl yet? Is normally the conversation.
Fantastic series.
Absolutely.
And yeah, radiation is scary. So, in grad school, I did a little work with an X-ray machine, and, it had a big safeguard on it, because if you put your hand in there while it was in operation, well, you'd be in a world of hurt. So I totally get why, people are reticent about radiation, the nuclear waste issue as well. The problem is you can't just shut down all your nuclear reactors and then continue to make substantial progress on climate change. So when you look at countries like Japan and Germany that mothballed a lot of their fleet in response to the Fukushima meltdown disaster, they filled up that capacity that went missing with additional fossil fuels. So if you're looking for something quick that you can bring online and replace those reactors, it's going to be coal or natural gas, which doesn't really help us. And so then any new renewables you bring online are going to be filling that void instead of taking more coal and natural gas offline to ultimately solve the problem. So we can't bring the reactors offline right now and expect to make fast progress on climate change. However, we can't run them forever. So there's a couple reasons for that. Each nuclear power plant has a lifespan, before you have to tear it down and build a new one, same as any other kind of factory or power plant. But then there's also the fact that there's only so much nuclear fuel that exists that we can mine. And eventually we will exhaust those resources. And whether it's in a couple decades or whether it's a century or two, eventually we'll have to rebuild our energy grid anyway. So even if we go through the procedure of building more reactors to get us through climate change, we're going to have to replace them anyway. So in my mind, that's not really a permanent solution. And if we're going to rebuild our grid from the ground up to be carbon neutral, why not do it in a way that is permanent? So my thinking is kind of a hybrid approach. We keep things running for as long as possible. That way we're not using our renewables to replace nuclear instead of fossil fuels. And then once we get to that point, there is an interesting way that we can continue to use nuclear to go the next step and ultimately reverse climate change, because stopping our emissions of CO2, methane to keep climate change from getting worse, that's only the first step. Then we have to take all the stuff out that we've already emitted to return us to a more stable state. And that requires a lot of energy all the time. But that's where nuclear can come in. We can keep that fleet running even after we have a wholly renewable power grid, pulling that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, sequestering it. And then once that's done, it's done. And then we don't need the nuclear reactors anymore. So it's really a way of just using what we have, using it quickly, and then, use it for its purpose, and then we can let it go.
Yeah, that makes sense to use as a tool, like as a means to an end. Yeah,
Exactly.
That makes sense. So like when you'd be able to finally get rid of them all, you would, but use them along the way, stay more carbon neutral. Yeah, that makes sense. Because, it ain't going to happen overnight. Not even close. You could have them running for the next 25, 30 years, 60, 90, who knows at this point.
Exactly.
If we get that far.
You build these things for a lifespan of, 50, 60 years. So if you put them in the ground, you might as well get the most use out of them that you can.
Yeah, there you go. Now, I asked before we started if you were familiar with skybraders. Have you seen these things yet?
I don't know if I have.
Oh, I'm going to pull them up now. The idea is that they vibrate and they produce energy, but apparently they don't produce enough. You have to kind of have swarms of them, and they look ridiculous. So I'm just going to pull this up.
I'll try not to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah. I first found them on like Sky News or something like that. So hold on.
You should be able to share your screen. Right?
Yeah, you don't want to see what I'm seeing right now.
Do I know? Right. I just realized whilst we're filming this is today's like Earth Day, isn't it?
Oh my God, it is.
I just realized that. Yeah,
that's perfect.
Exactly right. We can talk about that later on, like the impact you think it has, or does it even have an impact on thinking about these?
Okay, let me show you this now. Close that. And boom. All right, so it's something along the yards of this and this. So let's pull it up here. They kind of get stuck in the ground and they literally just vibrate, and it produces energy somehow. They don't look like they could produce as much power as something as bulky as this.
Yeah, so that's the major thing with
Don't seem
wind
too big either.
turbines. Yeah, with wind turbines, bigger is better because you move more mass, you can capture more energy from that, and you can produce, higher density energy. Whereas when you go smaller, the amount and the quality of energy you're going to get is reduced. So is that a guy standing right next to them?
I think it's a guy, yeah. That's at someone's LinkedIn, so let's go over to the Guardian for this one.
Does it give like an estimate of height, Jared, how tall they are?
We'll see now. Yes, I'm happy. So it's more. It says they claim to be more efficient and less intrusive than wind turbines. Okay. Okay, so they hope to have potential for these to be in urban environments. Okay.
I see in that picture they're relatively short.
Relatively, yeah, relative being the word.
Yeah, so another issue with really short wind turbines is that the airspeed is a lot slower the closer you get to the ground. And the higher up off the ground you get, the faster the average wind speed will be. So you can get more power more continuously.
There's a guy standing beside it, and he looks to be maybe 3 to 4 times smaller than this.
Yeah, that's very short
Yeah,
in terms of a wind turbine.
probably can't play that video.
13 meters.
Oh,
So generating 100 watts paired with 125 solar panel and a small battery.
Ooh, 100 watts is pretty much nothing.
That's what I was thinking.
Like my computer would need about 5 of those to power itself.
Oh, what kind of setup you got?
Oh, just a desktop.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so that's what I was thinking. Like they have all these big claims, but it's not that much power. That's the idea before.
Well, and that's a problem you run into with a lot of these new renewable technologies that gain a lot of press. Until you actually get them out in the field and prove what they're capable of, you can't really assume that they're going to be a silver bullet or a workable part of your energy system. So this kind of thing brings to mind like solar roads or like kite-based wind turbines or things that, they might sound good on paper, but in actual implementation, they're nowhere near as resource efficient. Yeah.
Imagine someone breaks like the solar road.
Well, that's exactly what happens. Like it just breaks apart and then it doesn't generate any energy.
Imagine getting stuck in a pothole in that thing. It'd just be terrible. Yeah, that sounds like it would be a nightmare. Even if you put something over it to try to protect it, that would eventually wear away. Or it would make it more difficult to access and make maintenance a pain in the ass, and it shuts down an entire road, as well as the power grid. It's a nightmare. That sounds terrible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did a test strip in France a couple years ago, and it just bombed.
You know any more that or any other renewable energy sources that just kind of bombed?
Yeah, so there was this design for like an offshore wind turbine, except it was it was basically tethered to a pole and kind of acted like a kite. That didn't really go too far past the prototyping stage, as far as I can see.
Sounds like it would just fall eventually, wouldn't it?
Well, it's nowhere near as efficient, and because it's like on a tether, it needs to be able to move freely, which means you can't pack them as densely as you could regular wind turbines that are stuck in place. So, interesting idea, didn't really end up making sense in practicality.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like we want them out of sight and just out of mind, like most power plants are.
Yeah.
Like I only know there's one nearby because there's giant plumes of smoke coming out of it. But besides that, I haven't seen another one in Ireland. And I've seen wind turbines, but they look kind of cool in fairness when they're off in the middle of nowhere in the hills. The ones near you, Thomas, those look pretty cool, to be honest.
Yeah,
oh yeah, they line the hills.
3 kilometers away from my house. I mean,
it seriously looks cool.
It's very nice.
Yeah,
it's built around a bog as well, and it's preserved bog as well. So
yeah,
it's cool.
So it kind of shows the energy that would have been produced there is now being, replaced by something more innovative. Yeah, rather than like Tuk and the boys back in the day, the old Celts, burning carbon rich dirt. Like that's seriously bad that we still did that until 2 years ago.
Well, to keep on that front, moving a little bit away from the power generation, but cutting into those bogs and peat is actually more counterproductive because those wetlands hold a huge amount of carbon. So if you're cutting into them, you're not only releasing it, you're reducing the potential of the ecosystem to pull more of it from the atmosphere. So you really want to preserve those as much as possible because that will help us ultimately recover from this.
It used to be legal. I don't know if it still is for the average Joe Schmo like me or Thomas to go out and cut it ourselves, because a lot of people did that for their own heating or whatever. And at the rate they were going, it would have taken thousands upon thousands of years for them to finally get to it, because they were doing it since the Celtic days. And the progress, it wasn't that much. But the second machinery got involved with it, you're looking at only maybe 25 years left of it. Yeah, but like I'm all for like the average Joe Schmo. I think they shouldn't have taken that away from us to be able to go and cut it ourselves. But the big companies, they have the funding to do better, so they don't really have an excuse. It used to be just cheap heating for the average Irishman who lived nearby. You know,
Yeah. Well,
it's weird when those things get taken away from you.
and plus it gives certain whiskeys their distinctive taste, that peat smoke. So
There you go. There you go.
maybe some carve
Where they
out.
going to get it now? Yeah. Yeah. The thing with peat is like it does replace itself over time, doesn't it? Like it is
does,
constantly going. A bit
but
like a soil, it builds up maybe centimeter every 100 years.
It does, but it certainly grows much slower than we can harvest it.
Oh yeah, we need to stop like cutting it for a couple 100 years for it to get back to where it was. Like it would. It's kind of dodgy at the moment because it used to be huge. The one like where we live now,
Oh, yeah.
but it's kind of been mauled. So it has. The mountain ones are kind of untouched, but the Midlands, yeah, they're kind of been mauled.
Right.
Yeah. Is there any peat bogs in the United States?
There's plenty of wetlands, and I think one estimate I saw, it holds, like, they're less than 3% of the land area, but they hold like upwards of 20-25% of the total soil carbon. So it's pretty impressive how much they can suck out of the atmosphere and keep contained.
That is actually seriously impressive.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. How do they get all the carbon that's in them? I'm pretty sure it's just like things dying there, and then it's kind of like a soil buildup, but it's just like constantly wet or whatever.
Yeah, so it's a couple of factors. So like, let's compare it to like a forest where, like, a tree dies, it falls over, it gets decomposed, and then some of it winds up in the soil permanently. A lot of it just gets recycled throughout the ecosystem. With a bog, you have, these high water conditions all the time, which prevents that decomposition.
It's
And
like a constant mud or worse.
Exactly. And a lot of the mosses and stuff that live there also make a slightly acidic environment. So that prevents, various kinds of bacteria and other microorganisms from really decomposing. So instead of, recycling that soil carbon, those nutrients, it just keeps building up over time.
Yeah. Yeah,
You,
it's sphagnum moss, isn't it? That's the one that's like living around here.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. Like it just gets trapped there until we use it.
And that's why
It's really good at preserving things. Like you ever heard about the bog man?
I was just
Oh
wondering
yeah,
that
that's
if I have
cool.
Pictures of that.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen real
Be
quick.
a pull up.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know this was found like maybe a kilometer from my house, the bog body. It was found just like out, maybe a kilometer from my house. This one here, the one from Crohan.
Just give it a second to load there.
All right, you see it in a second. But I
Yeah.
remember we were in school one day and they're like, "Did you see what they found like near your house, Thomas?"
It's the one in the top left, isn't it?
It's this one right here.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. They found that.
They don't know why they killed him either.
Just an unlucky guy.
Most
Yep.
likely.
But you see how like crazy well they preserve the guy. People used to use them. People used to use the bog as like refrigeration before there's refrigeration.
Oh,
So
sure.
they put like they're like a metal box or whatever, and they put their butter in it, and they hide it in the bog, and they'd go back to get the butter because like a lot of Ireland was like dairy farmers, like a lot of farmers until recently, and they just kind of had to have something to refrigerate it with. Modern
I mean, you
refrigerating
do.
is pretty new. Yeah, if it works. Yeah. I don't know how well you know the bogs, but we know them all too well. We fucking live on one. What kind of where you live, what kind of renewable energy is being used, if any?
Well, right now I live in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. So not too many wind turbines in my neighborhood. You do see houses now start to have these solar panel arrays on them. That's starting to become a little more prevalent. Out near my home state, Wisconsin, out in the Midwest, you're getting closer to the plains. So that's when you start seeing these massive arrays of wind turbines out on the distance as you're driving down the interstate. You see cornfields punctuated by wind turbines. So those are the ones that have been closest to me. But now you see down in the Southwest, you're starting to see more solar power, concentrated solar power arrays, more large scale solar farms as well. So those have been the ones that have gotten a lot of attention over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And when I was in the States, I was in the Badlands fairly recently. I seen nothing up there. Is there any reason for that? Like, I know like it's rich in like geological history, but is there any reason they don't put like a bunch of wind turbines up there? Because it is just road for miles and nothing else.
Well, so there's a bit of a catch-22. So there's plenty of wind, there's plenty of space, but there's not a whole lot of people. So you're out in the Badlands, you're in the Dakotas. They're some of the least populous states within the United States. So getting all that energy from the wind turbines to the cities, the more populated areas, requires an additional investment in transmission infrastructure, all the power lines, the towers that can bring that energy hundreds of miles to where there are people who could use that quantity. So,
but even for like the local populace, like you could power 2 states fairly handy then if there's no one living there.
Yes, you can. And they do get a substantial part of their electricity portfolio right now in those plain states. You think of Texas. Texas has a huge amount of wind power installed into it, including in the areas where there aren't as many people outside of the Dallas, Houston part of the state.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because like we don't think about the transmission bit of it. You know, we kind of just imagine that there's some kind of like magical wire that connects it, a bit like your man Tesla wanted. Isn't that what he wanted? He wanted like electricity to be like broadcasted wirelessly.
Yes, yeah, that was his major project towards the end there.
That would be fucking terrible. Imagine like, you know, you have a gas leak. Oh no. Yeah, that'd be rough. And like, he wouldn't even be that strong. I've seen it like debunked a couple of times. He's supposed to be like one of the smartest guys ever. Fair play to him.
Well, I mean, he did allegedly invent lasers and all kinds of doomsday weapons, so you got to be pretty smart to do that.
Oh yeah.
Doomsday. Yeah, well, we're kind of approaching that. Are you familiar with like? This is kind of like carrying into a better question. You familiar with Snowpiercer?
Yeah, the movie. That's a fun one.
Yeah, because it kind of shows like how, you know, how badly we could end up fucking this up. Do you think there's a reality to that? Like, let's remove the train, because that's kind of out there. Let's remove Chris Evans too.
I mean,
not sure if he'd survive.
No, we'll hold up now.
But
get rid of the train. I want
do you think that? Do you want that? Do you think that kind of gas is possible? Like, or we would try geoengineering to that degree?
Yeah, so geoengineering is another one of those elephants in the room, along with nuclear, because it certainly is possible to release those kinds of chemicals into the atmosphere to, you know, block out the sunlight. It's essentially what happens whenever a volcano erupts, and with the really massive eruptions, you've seen, you know, major climate impacts for a couple of years after. Back in the 1800s, a major volcanic eruption made it so that, you know, the United States basically had snow during the summer. It blocked.
What was that called again? Was that Krakatoa?
I think it was Mount Tambora.
Where's that? It's near Indonesia, right?
It is.
Yeah. What am I thinking? Krakatoa.
Well, that was also another big one. That.
Yeah.
But yeah, these volcanoes, they release massive amount of these sulfur chemicals, which then can block the sunlight, and we can do that artificially. If we want, we can throw that up in the atmosphere, but they don't stay up there forever. So,
which is a plot of the TV series, if you've seen that. It was falling, and it was getting more habitable.
Right. I haven't actually seen the TV series, just the movie. No spoilers, please.
Yeah, I'll dodge that one. But yeah,
Chris Evans isn't in it. It's not worth
your
time.
That's it. Yeah, no, it's really, really good. I prefer it to the movie, because it just has more time to expand on it. I love things like that where it analyzes like how badly we could really go, and it's not too far out of the realm of possibility.
Well, I think the risk
isn't. The train.
the infinite train.
Yeah.
But the risk isn't that we would go too far, because the history of it shows that these chemicals, they do come out over the course of years, and that if you just leave it alone, it'll eventually go back to normal, probably a lot quicker than the plot of the movie would prefer. So the major problem instead becomes we have to keep putting them up there. We have to keep refreshing this quote unquote mirror in the atmosphere, and that can lead to some complacency, because if you're blocking some of the sunlight out, it lowers temperatures a little bit, so you can get caught in the loop of doing that over and over and over again. But it doesn't solve the other problems of climate change, because adding more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere doesn't just make things warmer. It makes the oceans more acidic, so it harms all these different ecosystems. And if we're not really driving down at the root source of the problem, we can fall into the trap of being lulled into a false sense of security by doing these kind of geoengineering projects.
Because also going back to the ocean there, if we fuck that up, 50 to 80% of our oxygen comes from the ocean.
Absolutely.
You do not want to mess with that. That's a big no-no.
Did you watch Seaspiracy, that documentary on Netflix?
I have not.
It's very interesting. It's basically exposing the whole fishing industry. How Trash Island is I think it was 70% of it is fishing nets. It's crazy. And then all the whales and dolphins and being killed for no reason. It's crazy. It's crazy. And it even goes into as far as slavery in fishing vessels, in Japan. Yeah,
it's definitely a thing that exists.
Oh yeah,
unfortunately.
I know.
Yeah, it's one of those weird ones. We're kind of doing all sorts of stuff to mess this up, but it makes sense with the net part of that, because what else is going to hold the trash island together? But this perfect mesh that we've just left out there that tangles up in everything. So it gets together, it's going to build that island. So yeah, that's a lack of foresight. Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, certainly no lack of problems to be solved in our age.
Absolutely. But you got a couple of solutions for us. Thank God for you. Yeah,
I'm just here to help.
Well, no, you're pointing out some pretty serious stuff, and what you do have a chapter dedicated to what the individual person can do. The chapter you.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can the average person do?
So, this chapter was born out early in the process. Someone asked me, the logical question, what can I really do about climate change? What kind of behaviors can I do to help solve the problem? And, we come at this, we're a very consumptive society. We kind of define ourselves, what we buy, what we consume. So it's okay, how can I change those choices? When I'm at the grocery store, when I'm picking a car, when I'm doing all these myriad choices. The problem with that question is that one person, living perfectly, living all these standards, going vegetarian, driving an electric car, that won't offset a fraction of a percent of the problem of the total emissions. And by putting the onus on the individual person, you're essentially creating the situation where you're creating a situation where people blame themselves. They blame other people for not taking these choices, even though the choices are really largely out of our control. One person, even a small group of people, can't change the underlying forces guiding, why meat production produces so many emissions. And if we focus only on the individual choices, then it prevents us from seeing the larger systemic issues at play and how we can make structural changes that could have a much larger impact and actually move us closer to getting to that end state where we deal with the problem. So I approach it as, it's not a question of what you're eating, what you're consuming, it's what you're advocating for, because we live in, representative democracies. We have political power, we have rights to speak and petition. So it's using those powers to build solidarity, build a movement, and really advocate for those systemic changes that will really move us towards the solution to the problem. That's what the individual can do, is to use their voice to advocate, to work with other people, become part of this larger movement to demand the change that needs to happen.
I agree with that.
Absolutely.
But not to the extreme like some of the ones that we've been seeing recently. I don't know if you see that stuff with Extinction Rebellion recently, smashing the windows in places in London.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be dodging that one. There's better ways to do it. We know people, like personally, who've been on the show who do it a lot better than us. You can do a lot more than screaming and shouting,
Well, the
smashing
problem,
windows.
the question is, it's always a balancing act because, those people, they're very much engaged. They're very passionate about this
Mm.
situation. But certain tactics, you have to remember that there is, the large chunk of people who are just either not engaged or they're only nominally engaged in the process. So when they see that kind of behavior, how it's presented to them, they might then come away with a negative impression
That's the
of the
thing.
overall
Like
movement.
it
And then
ain't
they
good
become,
marketing. It ain't good
right,
marketing, no matter how noble the cause. If you're seen doing like these violent acts and this destruction of property, that relates to the average person. Like I'd say at least somebody has had like their windows done in their car. They've been stolen from. They can relate to that more so than they can relate to climate change because it doesn't affect them. So you have to kind of be better at marketing. No smashing
right.
windows. Yeah.
So then it's more about reaching that group of people by moving the overall view of the conversation. So making these ideas become more mainstream, just keep hammering it and hammering it until it is just the normal position to hold. Because then for those more politically disengaged people, that will then just be their default for what they expect in reality.
Hmm.
Yeah, moving the window of what's viewed as politically possible until it's just, well, I guess this is what most people expect to do.
Now, when you brought up the systemic part of it, I've been having this kind of thought. I haven't really put it into words properly, but I'll give it a go. I've been thinking a lot about like planned obsolescence in
Mhm.
everything. With regards to technology or even like your dishwasher or anything like that driving like consumerism like to an extreme to a point where it's unnecessary. Like they could build a phone that could last you a decade. You don't
Yeah.
need to get like the new iPhone every year, realistically. But they were caught red-handed slowing it down, like using I don't know software blockers or something. And like this planned obsolescence is making us have to go and get new stuff when it could work or yeah, fucking dodgy stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's all borne out because the manufacturer only makes money when they sell a unit, so they want to
yeah,
sell as many as possible. And if you build in that obsolescence, they can kind of predict, all right, well, in a couple of years, we'll be able to sell them another one and keep
so bad, isn't it?
making money.
Yeah.
So bad.
Well, they're just doing what they're incentivized to do. So it's all about changing those incentives so that it moves it towards building the longer lasting product. And you mentioned the phones that can last over a decade. So the first thing that'll pretty much quit on you is the battery, just because batteries have a set lifespan. So making it so that you have to design for it to be replaceable. And I'm old enough to remember where you could just pop out the battery on your phone, pop in a new one, and you're good to go for X number of years in the future.
Yeah.
So it's returning to that mindset where you're designing things to last longer, design them to be repairable, and then design them to be ultimately recyclable. So you don't wind up with a situation where if even with solar panels or wind turbines, they'll retire eventually. You want to be able to not just throw them in a dump somewhere, but reuse those materials and keep the cycle going.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree with the with everything you're saying there. But with the phones, you can replace the batteries, or like even if you're able to look at it yourself, like this is the first phone I've ever had that I can't take the back off and have like another battery
Mhm.
for.
Yeah.
But like how much handier would it be if you could just order one online and the phone just stuck around? Well, they did it in a way with this thing now that if I tried that, it would break, it would void the warranty. I
Yep.
probably have to like really do something crazy to try replace the battery, pay $150 to somebody to sort it out for me. And at that point, they realize you're going to spend €150 to replace a battery or add that and buy another phone.
Yeah.
Well, and even in the United States, if you try to replace that yourself, if you go to some third party, you could potentially face legal consequences for going around the different kinds of intellectual property controls.
Yeah.
So there's this big
It's a big
movement.
problem with Apple.
Yeah, the big movement in the United States about the right to repair, where you can actually take your devices apart to fix them when they break, instead of having to go through the approved and limited channels.
There's something going on there in Massachusetts for that, isn't there?
I can't remember exactly where.
That's where the big push is happening at the moment. Fair play to the guy trying to sort that one out.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, the amount of trouble they have to go through to get the stuff for this technology anyway. Like there's fucking gold, lithium. There's like some serious work put into a phone, and that's at a real cost to the environment. And if you're making it obsolete so that you buy a new one, that is so bad.
Right. Especially if you're not recycling it, because those materials don't go away if you throw it away. They still exist. So if you're able to recover them, then you don't have to mine new ones. You don't have to keep digging into the reserves and emitting all those carbons and having all that negative environmental impact. If you design it properly, where you can just re-extract and keep reusing them.
Yeah. It's unfortunate the way we go about it at the moment. You really hope we'd have a bit of cop on, but here we are, 2021. We have to have this chat because it's not like we're not, advanced enough to do it. Like we obviously are, and we could do it like really simply as well. But no, it's just that big thing with companies or whatever. Like the average Joe Schmo on the street, you ask them how they feel about climate change. They're willing to do their bits. They pick up their rubbish. They try to be more carbon neutral. But then it really does come down to the companies and powers that be. So you kind of put pressure on them to do it.
Well, and they're just doing what they're incentivized to do. They're doing what will maximize their return on investment. And right now that means, designing for obsolescence instead of recycling. It means getting brand new material because it's cheaper for them to do that. So it's all about, controlling that behavior, and so that it's, systemically favorable to do the more renewable option.
Wasn't Ryanair in the top 10 like worst companies for produce CO2 at one point, Jared?
Well, I'd put them in the top 10 worst companies, full stop. They're dodgy lads. They're like we studied them in business, and they are dodgy, the things they do.
Yeah.
Their business practices as a whole. Yeah. They ain't good.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I just think they have shit seats and they can't really land properly.
You
You ever see that flight, the Ryanair flight going in sideways? Shit looks scary, man.
They went to what?
It landed sideways.
Did you pull it up?
Very last second. Oh, yeah, sure, I can pull it up.
Yeah, go on.
But in the very last second, it like turned so it would land properly.
We'll show you what we're dealing with here.
I mean, and this is just like regular day stuff for an air, man. They are so bad. No leg room, can't really land. It's pretty bad. Let's see. I remember this video coming out. I think it was in Bristol. It happened. Where is it? There was a really good image of it. Yeah. All right, let me pull this up now. This is kind of scary, to be honest with you. And it managed to like straighten itself out, but it came in landing like that. If you can see that.
Give us a second. Okay, can't see yet.
But you'll see this picture and you'll wonder, like, it is landing, not taking off.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, right? It's landing, and it managed to straighten itself out, like, at the very last second.
Yeah, that could have ended in a fucking catastrophe.
Oh, it could have.
Yeah.
That's the scary thing about it, right?
Yeah. What do you think about renewable energy when it comes to the planes? Because I've seen people attempt it with like solar wings. Didn't really get very far.
Yeah, planes, that's one of the really hard ones. Just
Transport as a whole.
Transport as a whole, planes especially, just because for the kind of long haul flights that we're on, there's really no replacement for liquid fuels, because solar panels, they don't have the energy density. So if you covered the entire plane wings fuselage with them, you wouldn't be able to generate enough to keep it going. If you tried to do it with batteries, there's just not enough space for the weight of the batteries that would be required. You basically need some kind of liquid fuel that has the energy density you need. So then the question becomes, how do you get that fuel? And There are a couple ways to do it renewably. One way is to do biomass fuels. So you can take something like algae, grow it, and then basically separate out the different components. You get these different kinds of, well, it's almost akin to, fats that you can then process into fuel that you can use to power your jet plane. Or you could do a full-on chemical synthesis. You take some renewable form of carbon dioxide, combine it with some renewable hydrogen, and you just smash it together in this big chemical reactor to make fuels come out the other end. So the question for both of those is, in the first case, how much land area do you want to dedicate to doing this? And the second one, how much renewable energy do you have to do these, relatively energy expensive chemical reactions? But it certainly is possible, but right now aircraft make up about 3% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So that's a pretty substantial chunk that we will have to make carbon neutral in some way if we're going to ultimately reverse this.
Yeah, it's not as simple as we like to make it out to be. But yeah, that's my concern. Like, you can do cars at this point with electricity. Yeah, they have a shorter range, but they're working on that.
Mhm.
They're even working on trucks, which was a big concern. Like, would there be electric vehicles powerful enough to do their job? But yeah, the plane thing, it kind of looks a bit stuck.
Yeah, there's no substitutes now. The U.S.
Especially
is
for
kind of,
commercial flights. Like, even when they try to do it like remotely, like just like kind of a drone kind of thing, it ain't going nowhere without some assistance.
exactly. Now, I think your neck of the world is a little ahead of the United States in another option, which is, high-speed rail and really investing in trains, because you can run those on electricity. You don't need a liquid fuel. You don't need any fossil fuels for that. You can decarbonize it natively. The problem, though, is on our side of the pond, we just don't have the infrastructure built. So we'd have to basically start from scratch and build an entirely new transportation system centered around, non-emissive forms of moving people and goods.
And the average Joe Schmo is going to be like, no.
Didn't
Yeah,
Elon want
they
to do that though, from like America to England, I believe. I don't know if you could do it, but he definitely wanted to do like an Atlantic Euro train. Probably wouldn't be called Euro train though.
I'd buy it.
That
That's
sounds.
all right.
I don't know if that sounds feasible to me, but
Yeah,
I'll check it out there now. What's the idea?
I don't even know if it's true, but I definitely remember reading something.
You're really
about
tired. Yeah.
Elon Musk wanting to make a underground train that goes from the US to the UK.
I will say good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah, especially with the tectonic activity over there. That's
Dodgy.
Yeah,
looking rough.
Like I said, I don't know how. I guess what, guys? I sometimes believe fake news. It happens. Everybody buys into it at some point. It's so easy these days. I've done essays on this. It's like, I get it.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of misinformation out there, especially in this area.
I think when you've seen this, you've seen LA and London in the same thing.
Maybe.
It's a hyperloop. That's all it is. It's just hyperloop. There is talk here of it being for transatlantic stuff, but meh. It's more so designed for like London to Edinburgh and LA to San Francisco, and like sub 30 minutes kind of travel, which is fast as. Ooh.
Talking about fake news though, it's really bad considering there's people who believe that climate change isn't real. I mean,
sure, it's not.
I remember when I was talking
just
to,
this far into the conversation. No, it's not.
But I remember I was talking to
I'm kidding.
Dave Farina, and he's saying that fake news is pretty much like our biggest thing to get over, because we can't even agree if the fucking world is heating up, man. I mean, how are we supposed to solve it?
In fairness,
there's
plenty of examples on both sides. Like, I obviously believe the ones that come from scientists, but there'll be plenty of things saying it's not real, and that's just a headache for guys doing your job.
Well, it's one of those things where you can kind of follow the money. And a lot of those advocacy groups that are either like anti-wind power or anti, climate change in general, a lot of those tend to get funding from those who have a vested interest in the status quo, those who benefit from continuing to extract and burn fossil fuels. So there is a rationale behind it. It's just not necessarily productive.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It really is unfortunate. Misinformation is a big barrier.
Huge.
And hopefully they get over it. Hopefully we get sorted. Hopefully we listen to lads like you. But if people want to check you out, Samuel, where can they find you?
They can find my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, starting next week. I'll be running an initial promotion because my goal is to really get this information out there and really get some of these ideas and try to contribute to the conversation. So I'm running a promotion where ebook will be on sale for the minimum price on Amazon. Let's see, I'm available on Twitter. I'm at GoodestSam. Otherwise, I am on LinkedIn as well. I don't have a whole lot of social media at the moment. Speaking of that fake news problem.
Yeah.
But those are the places you can find me.
Well,
There you go. So if you got this far for play, we were very happy to be joined by you today, Samuel. You're a great guy to talk to. Hopefully people learned as much as we did. After this, Thomas can finally go to bed. So good luck to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you both for having me on today. I've really enjoyed our conversation here. This has been great.
I'm glad. We'll have you on again sometime when the second book comes out.
Oh, Lord.
There we go. It. That's how we
titled there you go. Success story.
well, now I have a job to do. I'll have to do another one.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Bye-bye. Take it handy. Good luck.